Hey, yo, Zion people, what's up? It's Monday. This is our 5 minute something video going over James Bryan Smith's book, The Magnificent Story. Forget what I call the videos, 5 minute weekly video. And today we're building on chapter 1 and moving into chapter 2 in the book, and I hope you're enjoying the book. Let me start with a thought, though, as we begin this video. Calling something biblical doesn't work. Just calling something biblical doesn't work. Now, I know that sounds almost like unbiblical to say, or unchristian to say, but if you think about it, when Jesus had his arguments with the Pharisees, they were both quoting scripture. They were both being biblical, and it wasn't getting anywhere. And ultimately, it's Jesus, not the Bible, that is the truth. The Bible points to Jesus. The early church was under no illusions that merely saying what they did and what they believed was biblical made it work. In fact, a lot of the early church heresies and the arguments that they dealt with were over Scripture, were over explanations of Christianity that were biblical, but they weren't getting anywhere. There were two sides, maybe three sides to what was biblical Christianity. And that's why the early church developed the creeds. The creeds are statements of what is essential in the faith, and they're a narrative. And they draw out of Scripture, but they're bigger than Scripture. Scripture is central, but it is not the central thing. Something greater is. And James Bryan Smith will contest in his book that the central thing is the good, beautiful, and true story of God that the Bible points to, but ultimately it's revealed in Jesus. So maybe whether something is biblical or not is the wrong question to ask, even though Scripture is important and we want Scripture to point to the true, beautiful, and good story. The story itself is greater than the Bible. And so the question really is, well, what story is going to shape our reality? What story is going to help us make sense of the Bible? And that's where James Bryan Smith is pushing us in the second chapter of the book. The first chapter, he lays out the ideas of beautiful, good, and true as important lenses that can help us make sense of the story of God. And now in this chapter, he's going to push us a little bit more and go, there are actually versions of Christianity that are called biblical that actually are not beautiful, good, and true. They're not the real story. They're shrunken stories. And a couple of these versions of the stories that he draws attention to in his book are ones that we're very familiar with. And I think it's important for us to really read that stuff in the chapter carefully and to really think about how these shrunken versions of the story might be versions of the story of the story of God, the story of the gospel that we've received that we should probably get rid of. But they might be versions of the story that we're comfortable with, and that can be very difficult. The two main versions he draws attention to are the do good works gospel, where it's up to us to do the good things in the world that make the gospel go. That's very much alive still. It's the social gospel, but it's also a version of the gospel where it's up to us in the church to build the kingdom. It's not. That's God's job. It's up to us to be witnesses to Jesus. So that's a false version of the story. That's up to us to do something to make the kingdom. The other version is the shaming gospel, where it starts off with you are a sinner and you will go to hell if you don't believe in Jesus. That's another bad version of the story that comes from parts of the Bible, but it's not the beautiful, good, and true story. Now, as you read this chapter, as James Bryan Smith unpacks these things, it can be a little unnerving for some of us. And for some of us, it might be like, thank you for putting a finger on this. And now in chapter 3, he's going to unpack what is the beautiful, good, and true story. But to do that, he's got to dismantle some of the bad stories we've gotten in. So that's what he's doing in chapter 2. And I encourage you to really read that and take it seriously. And as you read it, consider honestly, what version of these shrunken stories have you been given? Or what versions are you living with right now? And as destabilizing as it might be, can we get rid of those bad versions of the story of God so that we might open ourselves to a better story that he will unpack in chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on? But before he gets there, chapter 2 is really important to name the bad versions so that we can start to see the potential for a better version of the story of God. Hope you're doing good this week. If you ever have questions or anything, don't hesitate to reach out. And now this is a 6-minute video, and I'm sorry, and we'll talk to you later.